I never thought I'd feel invisible in my own home. But there I was, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty living room. The house was quiet, too quiet. The walls, once filled with laughter, birthday songs, and the chaos of little feet, now only echoed the ticking of the clock. My children were gone, grown and busy with their own lives, their own families. And I was alone. I tried to tell myself it was okay, that I had done what any mother would, given everything to my children, and I had. Every early morning, every sleepless night, every dream I quietly let go, all for them. But in that moment, the weight of it hit me like a tidal wave. I realized that while I had given them my whole life, I had nothing left for myself. Not a single friend to call, no hobbies, no ambitions I had nurtured, just a hollow house and the echo of my own heartbeat. I remember picking up a photo album from the table, my fingers tracing the pictures of birthday parties, school plays, soccer games. Every picture told the same story. Me, smiling, cheering, always there. And yet, as I flipped through the pages, the smiles on their faces seemed distant, almost foreign, as if I had watched their lives from the sidelines instead of truly being a part of them. I thought back to the small moments, the lunches I skipped so they could have more, the evenings I spent helping with homework instead of enjoying a book, the sacrifices I made quietly, thinking that one day they would notice, appreciate, love me back the way I loved them. But that day never came. And now, in the silence, I understood the painful truth. Love given without remembering to love yourself leaves a void no one else can fill. It's a lonely, almost suffocating feeling. I can still feel the ache in my chest, that quiet heartbreak that no one sees. And as I sit here, staring at the walls I once painted with memories, I wonder, did I make the right choices? Did my sacrifices mean anything? Or did I simply disappear into the life of my children, losing myself completely in the process? This is my story, the story of a woman who gave everything and ended up with nothing. I remember those early years like they were yesterday. Mornings that began before the sun rose and nights that ended long after it had set. My life revolved entirely around my children. Every thought, every decision, every small action was dedicated to their happiness, their comfort, their future. I didn't see it as a sacrifice then. It felt like love, pure, unwavering love. When my first child was born, I quickly learned that motherhood was more exhausting than anything I had ever imagined. I would rock her to sleep in the middle of the night, soothing her cries with gentle hums while my own body screamed for rest. I skipped meals to make sure she had enough. I washed endless piles of tiny clothes, scrubbed the floor for spilled milk, and wiped tears, both hers and my own. And yet, despite the exhaustion, I wouldn't trade a single moment. There was a joy in holding her small hand, in seeing her eyes light up at the simplest things, in feeling needed. Then came my second child. Life became a whirlwind. Two little humans needing me constantly, each with their own personalities, their own demands, their own dreams I silently nurtured alongside them. There were days I felt invisible even then, when the laundry never ended, when the meals weren't perfect, when I was too tired to be cheerful. But I pushed on. I told myself that if I worked hard, if I gave them everything I could, they would grow up happy and secure. That was enough. I remember missing out on my own desires, too. I wanted to go back to school, to have a small career, to travel, to simply have a quiet afternoon with a book or a friend. But there was always a reason not to. The children need me, I would say. There's always tomorrow. But tomorrow never felt like the right time. Every choice I made, every path I abandoned was for them, and I was okay with that. I thought I was doing what mattered most. Even celebrations became less about me and more about them. Birthdays, holidays, achievements. I lived for their excitement, their happiness. I planned parties meticulously, bought gifts they didn't even ask for, stayed up late to bake cakes shaped like animals or superheroes. I reveled in their laughter, in their smiles, in the sparkle in their eyes. In those moments, it felt like my life had purpose, like I was doing exactly what I was meant to do. But even then, the first seeds of quiet loneliness were planted. Friends drifted away because I never had time to nurture those connections. Hobbies I loved were shelved indefinitely. I became someone whose identity existed solely in relation to my children. I was a mother, yes, but beyond that, I didn't really know who I was anymore. And yet, I wouldn't have admitted that to anyone. I told myself I was lucky, I had my family, I had love, and that was everything. I believed that if I worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, loved enough, my children would eventually notice. They would grow up, they would look back, and they would see me, really see me. That thought kept me going through the years of relentless devotion. Looking back now, I realize I was building a life entirely around others, forgetting to build one for myself. I was like a candle burning at both ends, giving light, warmth, comfort, but slowly melting into nothing. And at the time, I didn't even notice. I thought this was the way it was supposed to be. I thought this was love. As my children grew, my life became a careful balancing act, a constant series of choices that always put them first. I stopped thinking about myself in any meaningful way. Every decision, every dream, every desire, I set aside. My world existed entirely for them. I remember the day I had to turn down a promotion at work. It was an incredible opportunity, one I had worked years to earn, something I had dreamed about for so long. But the timing was impossible. My youngest had just started school, and I couldn't imagine being away from him all day. So I let it go. There will be other chances, I told myself. This is for them. I convinced myself it was worth it, and I believed it, at least for a while. Holidays and weekends were no longer about relaxation or fun for me. They became a series of plans, activities, and events designed to make my children happy. I remember painting their rooms in the colors they chose, attending every recital, staying up late to help with science projects, sitting through endless soccer practices in the rain. All of it was exhausting, but I did it willingly because I loved them. Even my friendships faded over time. I stopped meeting friends for coffee or outings because I had to take the kids to their activities or they needed me at home. Slowly, people drifted away. I tried to stay in touch, but life for me was no longer mine. My identity, my world was completely wrapped up in the lives of my children. And yet, I felt pride in it. I believed that I was doing something meaningful, that every choice I made, every sacrifice I endured, was shaping my children into good, happy, successful people. That thought became a kind of armor, a way to protect myself from the quiet moments of loneliness that occasionally crept in. I remember one evening, after tucking my children into bed, sitting alone in the living room with a cup of tea that had gone cold. I looked around at the house, the toys, the backpacks, the half-finished school projects, and I realized that I had created a life completely devoted to others. There were no pictures of me achieving anything, no trophies for my own accomplishments, no little reminders that I existed outside of them. I had poured everything into my children and, in doing so, had lost myself along the way. Still, I justified it. I told myself that this was the natural order of things, that mothers give and children receive. And I clung to the hope that one day they would see it. They would recognize my sacrifices, remember the sleepless nights and the countless days I had put their needs above my own, and somehow they would repay that love with gratitude and closeness. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The more I gave, the less I existed for myself. I didn't notice the small cracks forming in my own happiness because I was too busy patching up theirs. I didn't see the quiet moments when I was alone, when the house was empty, when the phone didn't ring with someone thinking of me. I thought love was enough, that giving everything meant I was doing the right thing. Looking back now, I see that I was teaching myself a lesson I didn't want to learn. That giving too much without nurturing yourself creates a life that feels full to everyone else, but empty to you. Every choice I made was for them, and in that devotion, I slowly erased my own presence from the world I had built. The years passed, almost too quickly to notice. My babies, once tiny and dependent, were growing into their own people. And as they grew, something I hadn't anticipated began to happen. I started to fade into the background. It began subtly at first. A phone call that went unanswered. A casual invitation I wasn't included in. Little decisions being made without my input. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself they were just busy, that they were growing up and needed their independence. And I wanted that for them. I really did. I wanted them to flourish, to experience life fully. But the more I stepped back, the more invisible I became. I remember one Saturday morning in particular. I had baked a fresh batch of cookies, a ritual I had maintained since they were small, something that used to bring us together. I set them on the kitchen counter, expecting smiles, laughter, maybe even a shared story over a cup of tea. But they barely glanced at them. They were distracted by their phones, making plans, rushing off to meet friends. My heart sank. The house, once bursting with energy and noise, now felt eerily silent. The little disappointments piled up. Missed calls I waited for, texts that never came, birthdays I wasn't invited to. Each one was small on its own, but together they formed a quiet avalanche of hurt. I found myself sitting alone in my favorite chair, the same chair where I had rocked my children to sleep, staring at the walls and wondering when I had stopped being a part of their lives. And yet, I didn't confront them. I didn't ask for attention or express my loneliness. I had spent so many years putting their happiness above my own that I felt selfish for even wanting to be noticed. I told myself that this was the natural order of things. Children grow up, parents step back, and I should be grateful for the time I had spent nurturing them. But the truth is, gratitude doesn't erase loneliness. I remember nights lying awake, listening to the quiet hum of the empty house, feeling a pang of emptiness that no amount of love I had given could fill. I began to see the patterns. My sacrifices had created their comfort, their success, their joy, but in the process, I had been quietly erased from the story. There were moments when I caught myself smiling at old photos, remembering the days when their laughter was my whole world. And yet, the more I remembered, the more the ache settled in my chest. I had devoted myself entirely to them, believing that love and attention would create a lifelong bond. But as they grew independent, the space I had built for them became a hollow echo, and I was left in the silence. I had spent decades building a life around my children, only to realize that growth meant they were moving forward without me. And as the shadows of quiet evenings stretched across my home, I began to understand a painful truth. Sometimes, even the deepest love cannot guarantee that you will remain at the center of someone else's life. There comes a day when the quiet loneliness stops whispering and starts screaming. For me, that day arrived like a cold gust of wind I couldn't escape. I had held on to hope for so long, hope that my children would see me, remember the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the endless giving. I thought that love would keep us connected. I was wrong. It was a Sunday afternoon, one that should have been filled with laughter and family warmth. I had prepared a small lunch, something simple but made with love, the kind of meal I had spent years perfecting. the kind of meals I had always made to celebrate them. I called each of my children to let them know I was waiting. "Come by if you can," I said, trying to keep my voice light, hopeful. Hours passed. No one came. No call, no message, just silence. I sat at the table, staring at the plates I had set, wondering if I had done something wrong, if I had upset them without knowing. I waited until the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room. And in that silence, the truth hit me like a thunderclap. I was no longer a part of their daily lives. I was a memory, a background character in a story that had moved on without me. It wasn't just the missed lunch or the empty house. It was the realization that every sacrifice I had made, every dream I had deferred, every moment I had poured into them had not guaranteed their attention, their gratitude, or their presence. Love alone could not bind them to me. And suddenly, all the small disappointments that had accumulated over the years became a tidal wave of heartbreak. I remember sitting in the living room, the photo albums beside me, my hands shaking as I flipped through them. Each picture told a story of joy, of love, of devotion. And yet, looking at those smiling faces, I felt an unbearable emptiness. I had given everything I had, my time, my energy, my identity, and in return, I had nothing. Nothing that belonged to me. Nothing that reminded me I mattered. Tears ran down my face, hot and relentless. I had always been the strong one, the one who held the family together, the one who sacrificed without complaint. But in that moment, the weight of decades of giving, of always putting others first, came crashing down. I realized that while I had dedicated my life to raising them, I had never stopped to raise myself. I had never learned to exist outside their needs, and now I was paying the price. It was a painful awakening, one I couldn't ignore. I could no longer pretend that everything was okay. I could no longer hide behind the idea that love alone was enough. I had to face the reality of my life, a life built entirely for others, now empty, silent, and achingly alone. And yet, even in that heartbreak, a small flicker of clarity appeared. If I wanted to survive this, if I wanted to find peace, I had to acknowledge the truth. I had to accept that my love was real and deep, but it could not replace self-love. I had to confront the loneliness I had long ignored and begin to find myself again, not as a mother, not as a caretaker, but as a woman who deserved to exist fully in her own right. That day, the turning point came. I realized I had been forgotten, yes, but more importantly, I realized that I could choose what came next. And for the first time in decades, I began to wonder, could I reclaim my life, piece by piece, for me? After that day, the silence of my home felt heavier than ever. It wasn't just the absence of my children, it was the weight of decades of choices I had made, choices that had shaped my life entirely around them. I had given everything, sacrificed endlessly, and in return, I had a house filled with memories but no one to share them with. I spent hours reflecting on my life, trying to understand where it had all gone wrong. I remembered the nights I had stayed awake to comfort my children, the mornings I had risen before dawn to prepare them for school, the countless hours spent helping with homework or driving them to activities. I had poured my entire being into them, believing that love alone would ensure closeness and gratitude. But the truth was undeniable. It hadn't. The realization was almost unbearable. I began to question myself. Had I made mistakes along the way? Should I have demanded more attention, set boundaries, or fought for my own happiness? But the answers were messy, tangled in years of devotion and selflessness. I had never wanted to take away their joy. I had only wanted to nurture them. Yet in doing so, I had neglected to nurture myself. I looked around my home, filled with objects that were once symbols of love and family, toys long forgotten, drawings pinned to the walls, photographs capturing moments of pure joy. They were beautiful, yes, but they reminded me of what I had given and what I no longer had. Each memory was a double-edged sword, a testament to my dedication and a painful reminder of my isolation. Loneliness became my constant companion. It crept into my mornings and evenings, whispering doubts and regrets. I realized that love, no matter how deep or unconditional, cannot replace self-love. For years, I had measured my worth by my ability to serve and sacrifice for others. Now I was forced to confront the emptiness left behind by that measure. And yet, within that pain, I also found clarity. For the first time, I acknowledged the truth. My life was mine, even if I had spent so long believing it belonged entirely to others. I had to face the consequences of my choices, the isolation, the sadness, the quiet ache, but I also had the opportunity to reshape the remainder of my life. I could learn to exist fully, not just as a mother, but as a woman who deserved happiness, connection, and purpose beyond the roles I had played for decades. Was not easy. There were nights when tears came unbidden, when memories of past sacrifices felt like chains I couldn't escape. But gradually, I began to understand that confronting the pain was the first step toward healing. I had to grieve the life I had built for others and recognize the emptiness it left within me. Only then could I begin to imagine a life built for myself. In facing this truth, I realized something essential. My sacrifices had not been in vain. They had shaped my children, and that love would always be a part of them. But love for others cannot be a substitute for love for oneself. I had to learn to be present for me, to rediscover joy, to rebuild connections, and to create a life that honored my needs as much as I had honored theirs. Alone with my choices, I finally accepted the reality of my life. Painful, yes, but also filled with potential. I understood that the next chapter would require courage, self-compassion, and the willingness to prioritize myself without guilt. And for the first time in decades, I felt the faint stirrings of hope. After months of quiet reflection, of sitting with the loneliness that had once crushed me, something began to shift. A small, almost imperceptible spark of determination stirred within me. I realized that while I couldn't change the past, I could shape the life that remained. And for the first time, that life could belong entirely to me. I started with small things. Mornings became mine again. I brewed a cup of tea and sipped it slowly, savoring the warmth without rushing to tend to anyone else. I dusted off hobbies I had abandoned, painting, reading, even journaling, little pockets of joy I had set aside for decades. It was strange at first, almost foreign, to focus on my own desires, but with each passing day, I felt pieces of myself returning. I also began to reach out to the world beyond my home. Old friends I had neglected were contacted again. Some had drifted too far to return, but a few welcomed me warmly, reminding me that human connection can be reignited even after years of neglect. I volunteered at a local community center, sharing time and energy with people who valued me for who I was, not just for what I had done for others. These small steps reminded me that my life could still be meaningful in new and different ways. The hardest part, I discovered, was learning to forgive myself. For decades, I had measured my worth by how much I gave to others. Now, I had to unlearn that mindset, to see that self-care was not selfish, that boundaries were not betrayal, and that my happiness mattered as much as anyone else's. Slowly, painfully, I began to accept that it was okay to prioritize myself, that it was even necessary. There were still moments of sorrow, reminders of what I had lost. Birthdays passed without calls, holidays went by with empty chairs at the table, and I often felt the ache of absence deep in my chest. But instead of letting it consume me, I started acknowledging it with honesty, allowing myself to feel the grief without letting it define me. Each tear became a release, each pang of loneliness a teacher guiding me towards self-awareness. As the months went on, I found a quiet strength I hadn't realized I possessed. I discovered that my identity was not limited to motherhood, that my value was not tied solely to sacrifice, and that life could still hold beauty, excitement, and connection. I began to dream again. Small dreams at first, simple pleasures, but gradually those dreams grew bolder. Travel, learning new skills, joining social groups. These were no longer just fantasies, they were possibilities. The most profound change, though, was internal. I began to love myself in ways I hadn't allowed before. I learned to celebrate my achievements, no matter how small. I nurtured my passions and interests with pride rather than guilt. And with each step, I felt a sense of freedom that I had long forgotten. The freedom to exist fully, unapologetically, for myself. Rediscovering myself did not erase the past, nor did it erase the pain of feeling forgotten, but it gave me the power to reclaim my life. I realized that happiness is not something that only comes from others, it is something we cultivate within ourselves. And in that cultivation, I found resilience, peace, and the quiet joy of knowing that finally I was living for me as well as for those I loved. Looking back on my life now, I understand something I didn't grasp in the middle of it. Love is powerful, but it cannot replace the love you owe yourself. For decades, I believed that sacrificing everything for my children was the highest form of devotion. I thought that if I gave them my time, my energy, my dreams, they would stay close, always need me, always love me in return. But life doesn't work that way. People grow, lives change, and sometimes the ones we love most move on, leaving us in spaces we once filled with ourselves. I don't regret my sacrifices. They were made from a place of pure love. But I do wish I had also remembered to care for myself along the way. I wish I had nurtured my own dreams, maintained friendships, and allowed my own identity to thrive outside of motherhood. And giving my all to others, I forgot that my life had intrinsic value, that I too deserved attention, joy, and fulfillment. Now, I focus on myself without guilt. I fill my days with the things that bring me happiness, I reconnect with friends, I explore new passions, and I give myself permission to rest and reflect. The silence that once felt suffocating now feels like space to breathe, to grow, and to rediscover who I am. I've learned that self-love is not selfish, it is essential. Without it, even the deepest acts of devotion can leave you empty. I also learned to forgive. I forgive my children for moving on, for living their lives, and for sometimes forgetting the sacrifices I made. I forgive myself for allowing my identity to vanish in service to others. And in that forgiveness, I found peace. I realized that life is not measured by how much you give to others, but by how fully you live your own life alongside your love for them. To anyone watching this who has ever felt invisible, overlooked, or alone after years of giving, I want you to know this. It's never too late to reclaim yourself. Your dreams, your passions, your happiness, they matter. You are worthy of attention, love, and care, just as much as anyone else. Loving others is beautiful, but loving yourself is essential. I gave my whole life to my children, and yes, I ended up alone for a time, but I have also learned that being alone does not have to mean being empty. With self-love, reflection, and courage, you can rebuild, rediscover, and reclaim the life you thought was lost. My story is a reminder that the most important person to care for is yourself, and that love, when balanced with self-respect, can create a life filled with joy, resilience, and peace.